I've always been a pretty live and let live kind of person. I bought my house in the serene, beige-bricked paradise of Whispering Pines Estates precisely because I wanted a quiet, predictable life. A little patch of grass to call my own. I knew there was an HO, and I figured, how bad could it be? They'll probably just make sure no one paints their house neon green or starts raising alpacas in the driveway. I'd skimmed the bylaws during closing, seen the usual stuff about trash cans being hidden from view and grass height not exceeding 3 inches, and signed on the dotted line without a second thought. I was just happy to have a garage and a porch where I could drink my coffee in peace. For the first few months, it was great. The neighborhood was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. The lawns were flawless, the sidewalks pristine. It was fine. A little sterile, but fine. Then, my best friend Mia visited from the city. She took one look at the uniform houses and said, "Alex, it's like Stepford in here. Your soul is going to evaporate." As a joke, she mailed me a plastic, pink, gloriously tacky flamingo. Her note read, "A little rebellion for the revolution. His name is Phil." I laughed and placed Flamingo Phil proudly in my front flower bed, staking him right next to a perfectly manicured boxwood. He was a lone rebel in a sea of conformity. His goofy, optimistic beak pointed defiantly toward the future. And for about 48 hours, he brought me a ridiculous amount of joy. I'd see him on my way to get the mail and smile. Then, the first official communiqué arrived. It wasn't an email or a flimsy flyer. It was a cream-colored, heavy stock paper letter, delivered by hand and slipped into my doorjamb, sealed in an envelope that felt like it contained a declaration of war. The paper itself smelled faintly of judgment and expensive perfume. This was my formal introduction to the beige bureaucracy of Whispering Pines, and to the woman who would become my nemesis, Brenda McLemore.
I'm stubborn.
And I believe in principles. A $75 fine for a $12 piece of plastic felt less like a rule and more like a power play, a test to see if I'd roll over. So I didn't remove Phil. Instead, I went to the local garden center, strolling down the aisle with a newfound sense of purpose. I bypassed the tasteful stone bird baths and settled on 2 recruits. A gnome with a mischievous, slightly unhinged grin I named Gunther, and a ceramic squirrel holding a tiny, defiant sign that read, "Nuts to the HOA." I arranged them in a small semicircle around Phil, a tiny council of defiance. My Lawn Liberation Front was officially deployed. The HOA's response was swift and voluminous. The cream-colored letters began to arrive with the grim regularity of a metronome, each more creatively unhinged than the last. My mailbox, which according to code was a satin-black, tubular Model T-47, became a portal to a parallel universe where whimsy was a felony. They cited the proliferation of unapproved narrative sculptures and the creation of a de facto theme park atmosphere. One particularly inspired notice claimed the flamingo's pink was chromatically aggressive and created a visual hazard for motorists. The fines piled up into the hundreds, but I refused to pay a single cent. This was no longer about lawn decor. It was a philosophical battle over the definition of harmless. My calm, reasoned emails to the entire HOA board were met with a silence that was louder than any reply. My polite follow-up calls were intercepted by Brenda's smug, recorded voicemail greeting that always ended with, "Please consult your bylaws for clarification." The Cold War was turning warm. The social pressure began to mount. My next-door neighbor, Carol, a lovely woman who bakes incredible lemon poppy seed bread, approached me one evening while I was watering my slightly too long grass. "Alex," she whispered, looking nervously over her shoulder. Brenda stopped by. She asked me if your display was causing me emotional distress or making me feel aesthetically unsafe. She shook her head. I told her I thought they were cute, but she said I was enabling a descent into anarchy. That's when I knew I wasn't just dealing with a busybody. I was dealing with an ideologue. Brenda wasn't just enforcing rules. She was on a crusade for the soul of suburbia, and my lawn was her holy land. I realized then that politeness was a language Brenda and her board no longer understood. To fight this, I had to become bilingual, speaking the language of reason while mastering their native tongue. bureaucratic warfare. I needed to get smart, to fight their fire with the very paperwork they worshipped. I went to an office supply store and bought a 3-inch, heavy-duty binder, a pack of dividers, and a set of multicolored highlighters. I labeled the spine with a printed sticker, "The Book of Brenda." It was my shield, my ledger, and, I hoped, my eventual sword. My life took on a new rhythm. Every cream-colored letter was immediately scanned, dated, and slotted into the binder behind the Violations tab. I took time-stamped photos of my decorations from every conceivable angle, proving Gunther the gnome was a safe 2 feet from the sidewalk and posed no more of a tripping hazard than a dandelion. I started recording every one-sided phone call after confirming and double-checking that my state was a one-party consent state. For legal purposes, I'd mutter to myself, hitting the record button. Every email, no matter how infuriating, was printed and filed. The binder began to swell, a tangible weight of absurdity. Then, I did what any reasonable, utterly fed-up person would do in the 21st century. I dove headfirst into the most boring, mind-numbing internet rabbit hole imaginable. I dusted off the original HOA bylaws and covenants, a document thicker than War and Peace, and with all the charm of a vacuum cleaner manual. For 3 nights, fueled by cold brew and a simmering sense of injustice, I waded through the soul-crushing prose. I navigated architectural control committees, deciphered aesthetic review boards, and felt my will to live slowly seep away while reading about common area maintenance assessments. It was all about control, meticulously wrapped in the blandest, most impenetrable language possible. But then, just as my eyes were glazing over on page 186, I found it. A gleaming shiv of sanity hidden in the legalistic fat. Section 31.2. Use of private property for HOA events. I read it once, then twice, a slow, disbelieving smile spreading across my face. It was a clear, unequivocal, beautifully absolute prohibition. They couldn't so much as host a Tupperware party on my lawn without my express, written, and notarized consent. This was my trap card, my ace in the hole. I didn't know how, and I didn't know when, but I knew with a thrilling, cold certainty that their arrogance would eventually lead them to walk right into it. All I had to do was wait. Emboldened by the discovery of Section 31.2, I realized the battle had fundamentally shifted. It was no longer about playing defense for my gnomes. It was time to go on the offensive. The high priestess of the rules had to be living in a temple of perfect compliance, right? I decided to find out. I became the hypocrisy hunter, and my trusty, floppy-eared beagle, Baxter, became my unwitting accomplice. Our evening walks became strategic reconnaissance missions. A woman walking her dog is a harmless neighbor. A woman lurking with a telephoto lens is a potential felon. Baxter, bless his soul, was the perfect, sniffing, tail-wagging cover. We'd amble past Brenda McLemore's house at 7:15 p.m. sharp, a model of suburban routine. From the front, her property was a temple to HOA dogma. Impeccable lawn, beige siding, black shutters, not a single blade of grass out of place. It was boring, but it was flawless. First, then, I noticed her mailbox. The bylaws, in their infinite specificity, demanded a model hashtag T47 from mailboxes and more. One evening, as I paused to let Baxter investigate a particularly interesting fire hydrant, I got a close look. Brenda's mailbox was not a T47. It was, without a doubt, a model hashtag T48. It had a scalloped edge along the base and a slightly more ornate post cap. The violation was petty, minuscule, almost laughable. But it was a crack in her armor, a chink in the beige facade. I documented it with a quick, covert phone shot. Click. But I needed more than a pebble. I needed a cannon. Then, one perfect Tuesday evening, as the setting sun hit the neighborhood at just the right low angle, I saw it. From the slight incline of the sidewalk on the street behind her house, a sliver of a view over her 6-foot privacy fence was revealed. And in that sliver was a shimmering, brilliant, unnatural turquoise. My breath hitched. Brenda McLemore had a swimming pool. Not a permitted, above-ground kiddie pool. A full-scale, in-ground, kidney-shaped swimming pool. My heart hammered against my ribs. I fumbled for my phone, zooming in until the image stabilized. Click. The photo was crystal clear. Section 12.1a of the bylaws was unambiguous. In-ground pools are strictly prohibited to preserve the neighborhood's groundwater table and aesthetic uniformity. The queen of the rules was not just a rule breaker. She was a tyrant living in a palace of her own forbidden design. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it was my smoking gun. I had my cannon. Now, I just had to wait for her to load it herself. I thought I had seen the absolute pinnacle of HOA insanity. I was wrong. The next letter I received wasn't a fine. It was an announcement, printed on that same heavy, cream-colored stock, but this time with a faint, embossed floral border that made it look like a wedding invitation from a fascist regime. My heart didn't just sink. It performed a full-blown cannonball into the deep end of my stomach. I read the words, my brain struggling to process the sheer, unmitigated gall. A wedding. Brenda's daughter, Chastity. At my house. The initial wave of pure, incandescent rage was so hot I nearly crumpled the letter. They weren't just imposing fines. They were attempting a hostile takeover of my private property for their personal event. The specifics were what sent it from infuriating to surreal. I was to make my interior available as a bridal suite and public restroom, and my lawn was expected to be a spacious and welcoming venue, which presumably meant the immediate execution of the Lawn Liberation Front. But as I read it a second, then a third time, the rage cooled and solidified in my veins, hardening into something far more potent. A cold, focused, and utterly vindicated glee. They had done it. They had walked right into the trap I didn't even know I was setting. They had violated their own sacred bylaws in the most egregious, personal, and delusional way possible. This was no longer a skirmish over garden gnomes. This was checkmate. I immediately went to my computer, the Book of Brenda opened to section 31.2 like a sacred text. My email to her and the entire board was short, polite, and legally precise. I cited the bylaw, stated the wedding would not be happening on my property, and wished Chastity and Biff well in a more appropriate location. Her reply was swift, arrogant, and everything I could have hoped for. She called it a community event, stated my participation was not optional, and dangled the waiving of my fines as if it were a royal pardon from a queen. She wasn't just refusing to back down. She was doubling down, convinced of her own invincibility. I leaned back in my chair, a slow, wide smile spreading across my face. Okay, Brenda, you want a community event? I'll give you a spectacle this community will never forget. The morning of October 14th was so perfectly crisp and clear it felt like a personal insult. The sky was a mocking, brilliant blue, the kind of day tailor-made for a picturesque outdoor wedding. I was a bundle of raw nerves, but it was the good kind, the electric kind that comes before a perfectly executed plan. At 9:55 a.m., I was sitting on my porch in a worn-out lawn chair, sipping coffee with Flamingo Phil positioned stoically by my side like a pink-feathered lieutenant. My Book of Brenda binder was on the small table beside me, a talisman of truth. The air was so still I could hear the hum of a neighbor's refrigerator 2 houses down. Then, at 10 a.m. on the dot, the tranquility was violently murdered. A low, grinding rumble began to build, a seismic disturbance that vibrated up through the porch boards and into my bones. Rounding the corner of Serenity Lane, moving with the deliberate, earth-shaking pace of a prehistoric beast, was the most monstrous yellow bulldozer I had ever seen. The Grizzly was an apt name. It was a hulking testament to diesel power and American iron, its tracks chewing divots into the pristine asphalt as it rumbled to a stop, blocking half the street directly in front of my property. Mike, a giant of a man in a stained wife-beater, leaned out of the cab, gave me a grim nod, and then proceeded to lower the massive, scarred blade until it hovered just inches above my grass, as if sniffing it with malevolent intent. The metallic clang of the hydraulics was a dinner bell for drama, and one by one, my neighbors began to materialize, peeking out from behind blinds and drifting onto their driveways with phones held aloft. The wedding procession arrived not long after, a stark contrast of frilly delicacy meeting brute force. A van filled with white chairs, a truck pulling a frilly white canopy, and then Brenda's pearl-white Lexus. She erupted from the driver's seat, a vision in sequined lavender, her face a contorted mask of horror and utter, incandescent fury. She stormed up my walkway as if she could vaporize the 20-ton machine with the sheer force of her indignation. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked, her voice slicing through the diesel idle. "Morning, Brenda," I said, my voice dripping with a calm I did not fully feel. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. "Just a little landscaping. I'm putting in a koi pond. A very, very big koi pond. Thought I'd get a head start. You will remove this thing right now. My daughter's wedding starts in 6 hours." She spat, jabbing a perfectly manicured finger toward the grizzly. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Brenda," I said, standing up and picking up my binder. "You see, you're trespassing. You're attempting to hold an event on my private property without my express, written, and notarized consent. It's against Section 31.2 of the bylaws." I patted the binder's cover lovingly. "Would you like to see?" "Oh, wait. You already know the rules, don't you?" She was sputtering, her face turning a shade of purple that definitely violated the community's color palette. "I am the Hoa. I will have your house. I will fine you into oblivion." "Before you do," I said, my voice rising so the entire gathered street could hear, "let's talk about your mailbox. The model hashtag T48? The bylaws specify T47. That's a violation. And let's talk about the much bigger violation." I paused, letting the suspense build. "The illegal in-ground swimming pool in your backyard." The crowd gasped in unison. Brenda's face went from purple to a ghostly white. "That's a lie. You have no proof. You were spying." I held up my phone, tilting the screen so the neighbors in the front could see the crystal-clear photo of her shimmering, forbidden pool. "I think the zoning board would be very interested, don't you?" But more importantly, I turned to address our now captivated audience. Brenda has been fining us for the smallest infractions while breaking the biggest rules herself. She thinks the rules are for us, not for her. She tried to steal my home for her own personal party. Is this the leadership we want? A roar of agreement erupted. "She fined me for my wind chime," someone yelled. "She said my welcome mat was too colorful," shouted another. The beige brigade was in full panicked retreat. It was a revolution, and my lawn was its Lexington green. The fallout was swift, beautiful, and more satisfying than the final piece of a 1,000-piece puzzle. The wedding, obviously, did not happen on my lawn. It was hastily relocated to the HOA clubhouse, which, due to a previously scheduled chlorine shock day for the community pool, smelled powerfully of chemicals and deep-seated regret. But the real event was the emergency board meeting I demanded that very Tuesday. It was standing room only. The buzz in the air was electric. I stood before my neighbors, the Book of Brenda held aloft like a holy text, and presented my case with the cold, hard facts they all understood. Receipts. I didn't need to shout. I simply showed them the evidence. The violation letters for the flamingo. The email where Brenda admitted the wedding was not optional. The damning photo of the shimmering, illegal pool. I watched as the spell broke in their eyes. The fear was replaced by a dawning, collective anger. A vote of no confidence was called, and the aye votes weren't just unanimous. They were triumphant. Brenda McLemore was ousted on the spot, gathering her purse and her shattered dignity before fleeing the room without a word. The new board, which I was peer-pressured into joining to prevent future dictatorships, became a council of common sense. Our first acts were glorious. We erased every lawn liberation front fine from the books. We amended the non-indigenous fauna rule to allow for a reasonable and tasteful number of personal decorations, a deliberately vague clause that was our gift to the people. Brenda was given 30 days to bring her property into compliance, facing the very same daily fines she had so liberally dispensed. The sound of jackhammers tearing up her beautiful, forbidden pool was not noise pollution. It was the symphony of our liberation. Flamingo Phil, Gunther, and the squirrel still stand guard, now joined by a few more brave soldiers. My lawn is a vibrant testament to a simple truth. Sometimes, to preserve your peace, you have to bring in a bulldozer. And the final, perfect touch? My new, custom-made, hand-forged iron mailbox, featuring a detailed scene of a garden gnome triumphantly perched on a bulldozer. The board, my board, approved it unanimously.